October 27th, 2021. It's a chilly fall day in Covington, Georgia, a small city about 40 miles east of Atlanta.
Covington is a very nice suburban area and a great place to raise a family.
If you talk to anyone from Covington, they refer to themselves as the Hollywood of the South because numerous shows and blockbuster movies have been shot in the city of Covington.
But as night falls on this charming southern community, a horror story begins to play out in real life.
Around 10:30 p.m. that night, Tyrone McPherson was driving to his cousin's house to hang out.
As Tyrone makes his way to the neighborhood where his cousin, 35-year-old Jaquavia Bo Jackson lives, he receives a call from him.
Bo was frantic.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Bo told him his wife had just been shot.
Bo was too frantic to give too much information, aside from the fact that there was 2 assailants.
All right, listen, I just pulled up. Just stay with it. I'm gonna call the cops.
Tyrone hangs up with his cousin and calls police.
Newton County 911.
Hello, yes, there's been a shooting. I need some help. Send some help, quick.
Newton County investigators race to the home.
They know time is of the essence in a situation like this.
When the police arrived, Tyrone was outside with his cousin.
Come on!
Bo kept repeating, I knew this was gonna happen. They just came into the house and they started shooting.
Bo is hysterical, holding a gun in his hand.
Sir, drop the weapon, please.
She's inside. I did everything I could.
He begins to sob and says that his wife has been shot and he tried his best to protect her.
Police slowly make their way inside the home with guns drawn.
They have no earthly idea whether Bo's wife is dead or alive, or even if the shooters are still on the scene.
Investigators don't find any sign of the shooters, but they do find Bo's wife, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson.
She appeared to have been shot several times.
An officer checks for any sign of life but does not find a pulse. Shakima is gone.
Shakima Brown Jackson was a warm-hearted young woman dedicated to living out her faith.
She was the most special thing in life I could ever hold and endure.
My little cousin, she was a ray of light. She lit up any room that she walked into. She's funny, too smart for her own good.
Shakima was a great, bubbly person, very jokeful, loved the Lord.
Shakima was very active in her church and she loved volunteering.
Right away, I could see that she was really serious about learning about God. She came to me and said, yeah, I would like to teach. And so I told her to prepare some lessons and see how you do.
Let's start with the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you, God, for this Bible study that we're having on tonight, Lord. I just thank you.
Shakima never, ever missed Bible study.
He surrendered up his life so that we may have eternal life.
Shakima would always encourage me and just be like, see where God leads you.
For Shakima, she believed God was leading her to a career in law enforcement.
She loved to help people, and the job that she was getting into, she felt like that she could be a part of something bigger than herself.
On the job, she met the man who would eventually become her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
She was working as a security guard in a manufacturing company.
She would let people in, let them out.
Bo was a successful truck driver.
Well, seeing you always makes my day.
Thank you.
The attraction was there, and Bo didn't waste any time.
Mind if I take you out this weekend?
I'd like that.
He became this wonderful man to her because she opened her heart. She fell in love.
She was just excited to, have somebody that was quiet and didn't seem like they was out there doing everything under the sun.
In February of 2020, the couple promised themselves to one another in holy matrimony. And that fall, Shakima gave birth to their son.
She did everything for this kid. She was an immaculate mom. Everything, this was her world.
Boy, her world lit up. He was her ray of sunshine. Literally. he got this infectious smile from Shakima.
After the birth of her son, Shakima was more driven than ever.
She was very interested in becoming a deputy.
She was determined to do everything. With a baby, with a husband, I'm determined. I'm gonna be a deputy sheriff.
Shakima's determination paid off.
She worked hard at it, she studied it, she was in mandate for months and months, and I remember the day she called me on the floor screaming and hollering, "Mommy, I did it, I did it." I said, "Yes, baby, I knew you could, I told you."
Bo and the rest of her family were so proud of Shakima.
But only a month after her promotion, Shakima's fellow deputies have found her inside her home, covered in blood.
We did discover Shakima Jackson, deceased on the couch, appeared to have been shot several times.
However, police soon learned that Shakima isn't the only victim of this deadly shooting.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down.
He's been shot one time in the back of the head.
They now have a double homicide on their hands.
With her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson by her side, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson was ready to take on the world.
She was just so excited to be a deputy sheriff. She had just graduated the mandate process, and she was certified.
Shakima had a great reputation. She was a hard worker. She was a Fulton County deputy. Everybody had nothing but positive things to say about her.
However, just 1 month after her promotion, Shakima has fallen victim to a horrific shooting.
Shakima had been shot 7 times, once in the shoulder, 3 times in the chest, and another 3 times in the face.
To detectives, it seems like overkill.
That's a lot of time to shoot someone. There was a lot of rage behind these shots.
And Shakima isn't the only victim.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down on the floor.
He was shot in the back of his head through his hoodie.
But who is he?
His driver's license identified him as Lavoy Brown, Shakima's older brother.
30-year-old Lavoy Brown wasn't just Shakima's big brother. He was her best friend.
They just always stuck together. They never even had fights.
You couldn't say Lavoy without Shakima and Shakima without Lavoy. He was an active member in our church also. He loved God.
Everybody in the church, when they first came, thought they were twins because of how close they were. They interacted so well together. I'm saying these 2 young folks are really, really humble and loving towards one another.
Lavoy was her full protector. He protected his sister from head to toe. You hear me? He was her, how you say, ride or die? They did everything.
So how did this beloved brother and sister end up shot to death, just mere feet from each other?
There were no shell casings in the living room at all. At that moment, I thought somebody just picked them up to cover their tracks.
But investigators do find a spent .45 caliber projectile.
And it's covered in sheetrock and fiber, as if it had gone through the leg of the couch.
It appears as if the bullet was shot at a low angle at the end of the hallway out toward the living room.
Going down the hallway, there was pieces of sheetrock that were on the floor. At that time, we just knew that we had 2 people dead and we only had 1 person there that was possibly a witness, and that was Jaquavia.
He has been taken to the station and is awaiting to give a formal statement.
But before detectives can head back to the station to interview Shakima's husband, her panicked mother arrives on the scene.
I pulls up, I see the yellow tape. I'm like, God, yellow tape. You know, I'm from New York. When you see yellow tape, that's death.
We can't let you inside.
What is going on?
Can't
Where
let you
are
inside.
my babies?
Where are my babies? I'm screaming out, she's a deputy, she's one of y'all. Ah, where my kids? Lavoy, screaming, hollering. Oh, they gone.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
He said 2 people came in there and killed them. I dropped to my knees. Them officers, all they could do is shake their head.
Losing a son and a daughter in the same night. It was such a tragedy.
When I see my kids come out in the body bag, it's like I lost my whole soul. I lost myself. I lost myself.
When the news spreads to the rest of Shakima and Lavoy's loved ones, they're equally devastated.
I can't even explain the hurt. It's like being in a storm and the wind blowing everybody everywhere. There was a lot of pain, a lot of questions, me praying to God, asking why.
I literally felt my world turn upside down. Literally. Like it was night and day. I'm calling, I'm trying to call whoever to find out what's going on. I'm even calling Lavoy and Shakima phone because I'm like, okay, I can't believe it.
40 miles away, at Fulton County Sheriff's Headquarters, Shakima's co-workers are also struggling to come to terms with the tragic news.
Once I found out what was going on, it was just unreal. I was just heartbroken because of the relationship that we had built and what she meant to the sheriff's office and the people that she worked with. And she didn't deserve that at all.
Back at the Covington Police Station, homicide detectives sit down with Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
He still appeared to be pretty distraught.
Bo, tell us what happened tonight.
Bo says earlier that evening, Shakima informed him that her brother would be coming over with a couple of his friends.
Lavoy knows 2 guys that would like to get in the trucking business and want to come by and talk trucking business with him.
I mean, it would really mean a lot to my brother.
I don't know, it's kind of short notice, and my cousin's already coming over tonight.
He don't feel comfortable about it because he don't know these people.
But Bo says Shakima was insistent.
Honey, it's not gonna take that long, come on.
Okay, fine.
Around dinner time, Lavoy came over to wait for his friends. But as it got later in the night, Bo told him that it was too late for his friends to come over.
It's getting kind of late, boy.
Come on, man. Just meet with them. You might like what they have to say.
What do you mean?
You help these people out? It's $500 a day, man.
Bo tells detectives that's when he realized what Lavoy and his friends were really after. And it wasn't business advice.
These men that were coming over to the house were in the drug game.
Jaquavia starts then saying that Lavoy is trying to get him to run drugs, that he's only wanting him to get these trucks and stuff like that so he can run stuff up for him in the trucks and whatnot and try to help him out in an illegal business.
According to Bo, Lavoy said he owed a kingpin a lot of money, and this was the only way he can think to repay his debt.
Please, man, I owe these people so much money. Help me out on this, man.
Well, you're gonna have to find another way. You better tell your friends it's off.
Bo said he declined to get involved.
But Bo explains that before he and Lavoy could continue their discussion, the men showed up at the house.
Must be them.
Hey, what's up? What's up?
This my brother-in-law, Jaquavia, but you can call him Bo.
Bo claimed the men introduced themselves as Barry and City.
And Bo says Shakima welcomed them with open arms.
Can I get you two anything?
I'll take a water if you don't mind.
Sure.
Bo tells detectives he immediately got a bad feeling. So he excused himself to go grab his pistol from the bedroom.
Show him, sit down.
Excuse me for one moment. I'll be right back.
From the bedroom, Bo says he could hear the 3 men start talking business.
What do you have for us?
My brother-in-law, he's a truck driver. He can transport some of that stuff across the country.
Okay. I mean, we've been helping you out a lot.
He could hear them talking for a moment, and then the volume of their voices increased.
It started to get heated.
He said that he could hear them arguing with LaVoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
He hears yelling,
What's going on?
and then he hears gunshots.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Shakima Brown Jackson and her brother LaVoy Brown are speaking with Shakima's husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
Bo claimed that on the night of the murders, LaVoy invited some men over with the hopes of convincing him of transporting drugs on his truck.
And Bo says when he excused himself from the conversation, he could hear it get heated from the back bedroom.
He said that he could hear the men arguing with LaVoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
Then Bo says he heard Shakima enter.
What's going on?
He hears yelling, and then he hears gunshots.
In an attempt to scare the men off, Bo says he then cocked his gun.
He leans out the back bedroom door and fires one shot towards the living room area, towards the male.
The bullet scraped the side of the wall. Detectives note that this is probably the projectile that they found on the living room floor, covered in sheetrock.
By the time Bo made it back into the living room, the men were gone.
He sees LaVoy's dead. He sees Shakima's dead.
Yo, Tyrone!
In a state of shock, the first person he thought to call was his cousin Tyrone, who was already on his way over.
She bleeding bad.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Detectives asked Bo if he had any type of description about these men called Barry and City.
One was heavy set and short, one tall and skinny.
Detectives are skeptical of Bo's story.
It seems highly unlikely that LaVoy would be mixed up in the drug game.
LaVoy has no history of drug-related arrests. In fact, he has no criminal background at all, for that matter.
But one element of Bo's story does add up.
The gun Bo was holding at the crime scene wasn't a match for the bullets that killed Shakima and LaVoy.
Bo's gun was a .45 caliber pistol.
The bullets retrieved from the victims' bodies were consistent with a different type of weapon.
That firearm, based on what the forensics stated, it was a Colt revolver, .38 Special to .357 Magnum.
Could Bo be telling the truth? Hoping for more insight into his relationship with his wife, detectives bring in Shakima's mother, Zona Inman, the next morning to give an official statement.
She was still understandably heartbroken after what happened to her two children.
You got a mother coming out here who didn't lose one child. She lost two children all at one time from one act of violence.
Is it possible that Leroy or Shakima had ties to gangs or drug affiliates?
I'm sorry, what? We talking and he's saying a whole bunch of mess about all of this crazy nonsense.
It don't even sound right. That's hard to believe. What, two guys?
That is ridiculous.
Like, they don't mix. Come on, Shakima and LaVoy. If anybody knows them, come on now.
If you knew them personally, you'll know. You could never identify them with anything dealing with drugs.
LaVoy was a hard worker and a very good man. He would never get involved in the street life. And he would never do anything to put his sister's career or safety at risk.
Okay. I can understand that. But what can you tell us about Shakima's relationship with her husband? Any issues there?
Oh, yes.
She told me that Shakima and Jaquavia had been having marital problems, that Jaquavia had actually moved into another bedroom. They were having issues with money and stuff like that.
You talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking.
So Shakima and Jaquavius were arguing every day. Their marriage started going down.
Zona explains that although Bo worked in trucking at the beginning of the marriage, by October of 2021, he had been laid off.
I can't afford to keep doing this.
I ain't trying to hear all that, man.
I don't know what happened, but he had to resign. so they claim. They were having issues with the bills. It was always the bills, the bills, the bills, the bills, the bills, the bills. And he was lack of work. He couldn't help her pay nothing.
But it wasn't just money problems they were having.
Shakima had just found out that Bo had been unfaithful, and she discovered it in the worst way possible.
Letters start arriving to the house, ordering Bo to take a paternity test.
Not only had Bo cheated on her, but the woman was pregnant.
Detectives investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson and Lavoy Brown are speaking with the siblings' mother, Zona Inman. And they've just learned that Shakima's husband, Bo, had been hiding a horrible secret from her.
Not only had Bo cheated on Shakima, but he had gotten another woman pregnant.
She on the child support for the kid, and they sent the letter.
Shakima confronted Bo about the letters.
Bo, what is this?
Wow, this is ridiculous.
Bo, you can be honest with me. What's going on?
Come on, babe. You know I never cheat on you.
With their relationship teetering on the edge, Bo made a promise to Shakima.
Jaquavia told her that's not his kid, she's lying on me, and I'll prove it.
He said he would take the paternity test, but was certain they would come back negative.
I will take the test and you will see. Don't worry.
While Shakima was hoping for the best, she had her doubts.
She called me saying, if he fails these tests, I'm taking my son and I'm leaving.
Because believe me, my daughter is not going to deal with you and she know you cheating, because she's not going to stand for that.
But to everyone's surprise, the results indicate Bo is not the father.
The paternity results were negative, as Bo had predicted.
How did the other woman take the news?
Not well. She still believed that the child is his.
This girl was very adamant, I'm going to get your daughter and Bo. I'm going to take them down. This is his baby. He's going to claim it.
Was it possible this woman was involved in the killing somehow?
Well, thank you for coming in, and again, we're sorry for your loss.
Detectives are eager to speak with Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett. But before they can track her down, she comes to them.
I got notified by dispatch that there was a female that wanted to speak with me in reference to Jaquavia Jackson.
Thank you for coming in, Miss Burkett.
Of course.
So tell us about your history with Mr. Jackson.
She was in a relationship with Jaquavia. She didn't know that he was married, and then when they split up, by that point, she was pregnant.
When I told him about the pregnancy, he wanted nothing to do with it.
He was in complete denial that the child was his.
Bo told her to leave him alone because he did not want his wife finding out that he had cheated. Eventually, he stopped accepting any of her calls and texts.
But what am I supposed to do? Raising a child alone isn't easy. So I decided to get the courts involved.
She wanted Jaquavia to start paying child support, and so she wanted him to take a paternity test.
She just wanted Bo to take accountability for his actions and assist her financially with their child.
But when the paternity test came back, it showed that Jaquavia wasn't the father.
However, Destiny isn't buying it.
She's like, I know he's the father. He was the only one I was with.
She said that she was absolutely convinced that Bo had rigged the DNA test.
So how do you think he rigged it?
Look at this.
Whenever someone comes to take a paternity test, a DNA test, they actually take a picture of whoever shows up.
When she looked at the photos, she knew it was not Jaquavia that had taken that test.
They look at the man in the photo, and she's right. It's clearly not Bo Jackson.
It's a completely different person. It would appear that he sent someone else to take the test in his place.
But that's not all.
My attorneys discovered that I wasn't the only one he did this to.
There was a second woman who came forward saying Bo did the exact same thing to her and faked a paternity test to avoid paying child support.
How many mistresses did Bo have?
While investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson, detectives have discovered that her husband, Bo, had potentially gotten 2 other women pregnant.
I wasn't the only one he did this to.
2 women had come forward and requested paternity tests in an effort to try to get child support from Mr. Jackson. There's clear evidence that showed that he sent someone else other than himself to go take the DNA test in a clear attempt to try to show that he was not the father, even if he really was.
He had the person go to take the paternity test for him. That's out of the box. I've never heard of anybody doing that.
For you to sit down and plot something as crazy as this. He was sneaky, very sneaky. He's a liar. Everything came out his mouth was a lie.
And Destiny says when she found out about Bo's other pregnant mistress, the 2 women decided to join forces against him.
We had our attorneys submit for follow-up paternity testing and a court date set to argue our case.
Everything was leading up to their day in court. The courts had even subpoenaed witnesses.
One of those witnesses was Shakima Brown Jackson.
The court subpoenaed Shakima to help confirm that the man Bo sent to take the paternity test was indeed not Bo.
But Destiny says they never made it to their day in court.
The court date was scheduled for October 28th, the day after Shakima and Lavoy were murdered.
The hearing was supposed to be today, but here we are.
Detectives believe that this is not a coincidence. They are truly starting to believe that Bo Jackson's story of 2 drug dealers killing his wife and brother-in-law are bogus.
So we go out the next morning, we do a more comprehensive canvass of the neighborhood.
They noticed that the home directly across the street from the Jacksons' residence had security cameras set up.
We wanted to know, did it catch anything on camera? So we went up and tried to get the video from them.
But detectives are out of luck.
They advised us it doesn't work. It hasn't worked for months.
Sure wish I could be more help. Wait a minute, one other thing, though.
He did advise us that Jaquavia reached out to him and did ask about the camera. He wanted to know if his camera worked. The neighbor told him, no, my camera doesn't work. It hasn't worked in a while.
This as a major red flag. Why would Bo be concerned about if their cameras were working or not?
Thank you for your time. Yes, sir.
That just, to me, added more suspicion towards Jaquavia.
And in speaking with another neighbor, investigators hit the jackpot.
Their security cameras are functioning.
The surveillance camera pointed towards Mr. Jackson's front yard and the beginning of the driveway in the mailbox.
Back at the station, detectives begin poring over the footage.
The detectives scrubbed through to about 10:20 p.m. on October 27th, which is when Bo claims the killers arrived. However, they watch the road and they don't see a single car pull up to the Jacksons' residence.
10:21. You hear these shots go off.
This could only mean one thing. The shots came from someone already inside the house.
Bo's story about Barry and City is a lie.
Nothing that Jaquavia had told me in our interview or the day that he talked to the deputies was corroborated with the video.
With this evidence, detectives have exactly what they need to obtain an arrest warrant for Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
Yeah, this is Hicks. We got him.
So we took arrest warrants that day for murder, aggravated assault, and several other charges, and we took him into custody. His demeanor went from nothing to all of a sudden, you got the wrong guy, trying to drum tears up or something, and act as if he was definitely the one person that did not do this, that he was being falsely arrested.
And the dramatics don't stop there.
It appears that Bo is very uncomfortable. He's wincing and shifting around in his seat.
Are you nervous? It's not that at all, man. It's my stomach.
He claims to have had ulcers or something like that.
The detectives get him something to drink to try to soothe his stomach so they can move on with the interview.
Honestly, tell us what happened. I told you, Leroy brought in some bad dudes who wanted drug money. He couldn't pay up, so they killed him.
Bo is adamant that what he said before was true.
Detectives tell Bo that the jig is up. They confront him with the surveillance footage and tell him that his story does not make sense.
It's then that Bo throws himself from his chair.
He's, oh man, you act like you don't believe me. Oh, my stomach. And he started acting like he was getting sick in the interview.
Babe, call the doctor.
He says his stomach is on fire.
Detectives suspect that Bo is faking the pain to get out of questioning, but they can't say for sure.
Bo is taken to the hospital to be treated before being sent to jail.
Get up.
They wouldn't be getting any confessions out of him.
But even without a confession from the man himself, Bo goes to trial for double homicide on July 24th, 2023.
He pled not guilty. His defense, and remained to be the same defense, was that these two random people showed up to the house that night and shot and killed Lavoy and Shakima. That was the only defense they had.
When it's their turn, prosecutors present what they believe really happened.
They believe that things were on the rocks between Bo and Shakima.
I noticed my daughter wasn't happy anymore. She wasn't smiling anymore. She would, Mom, what do I need to do?
And when the letter arrived about a court-ordered paternity test for Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett, Shakima had reached her breaking point.
Bo, what is this?
She couldn't believe her husband was being accused of fathering another woman's child.
They were talking about separation.
But when the paternity test came back negative, Shakima decided to give Bo one more chance.
Marriage was very sacred to Shakima. She wanted to trust her husband.
Now they're talking about trying to work things out.
However, Bo knew that his true colors were soon to be revealed.
Shakima received more letters from the court, now summoning her to be a witness in the paternity case.
She thought this was a follow-up court date to confirm that Bo wasn't the father.
Little did she know at the court date, she would have found out that her husband was accused of fathering children with multiple women and had faked the previous paternity test that he took.
She was about to learn the truth about everything.
Prosecutors argue that it wasn't a coincidence that Shakima died the day before they were due in court.
She was definitely gonna divorce him.
He'd been lying to her their entire marriage. He was possibly gonna lose everything he had. He wasn't gonna have anywhere to go.
Not only would he lose his meal ticket if Shakima divorced him, but she also would have likely got custody of her child, and Bo would have had to pay her child support.
Bo couldn't let that happen. If Shakima didn't want to be with him and put up with his philandering ways, she had to go.
But why did Lavoy have to go too? Although Jaquavia Bo Jackson refuses to admit culpability in the double murder of his wife, Shakima Brown Jackson, and her brother, Lavoy Brown, prosecutors are confident in their theory of what happened.
Bo had been lying to Shakima about the other women he'd been sleeping around with.
And at the paternity hearing scheduled for October 28, 2021, Shakima was going to discover the truth.
He knew that would be the last straw in their marriage, and she'd likely divorce him. She would keep their home and their son.
He thought he was about to lose everything.
So Bo did the unthinkable.
I think he, on the fly, kind of concocted this idea of, I'm going to kill Shakima.
He grabbed the .38 caliber revolver and went into the living room.
She was just literally scrolling Facebook, comfortable on her own couch, watching videos when she was shot. Lavoy was asleep, and the initial gunshots scared him. He started to run, and he was shot in the back of the head, and he fell forward.
He just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
After Shakima and Lavoy were dead, Bo tried to stage the scene as if intruders had committed the crime.
Prosecutors believe Bo got rid of the .38 after he killed Shakima Lavoy, then used the .45 to stage a defensive shot.
And there's a good 3 or 4 minute gap between the group of shots that clearly are the murder shots, and then what we think is the defendant's sort of staged self-defense or defense of other shots that happened about 3 minutes later.
As the prosecution rests, the case is handed over to the jury to decide.
After the jury deliberated for some time, they came back with a verdict.
Jaquavia Bo Jackson was found guilty of 2 counts of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during a felony.
He's sentenced to life without parole, plus 10 years.
He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
He never showed his emotions, even throughout the entire trial. Even once he was being sentenced, nothing changed. He had a very cold look on his face the entire time.
A follow paternity test determined Bo was the father of Destiny's baby boy. He wasn't the father of the second mistress baby.
For the family and friends of Shakima and Lavoy, it's a somber end to their loved one's story.
Justice has been served, even though, it's still heartbreaking.
There's no way you could tell me you loved her and turn around and do that. No. That was hate.
The child has to grow up without a dad, no mom, no nothing. I'm grandma, you know what I'm saying? I can't teach him manly things in spite of what I'm going through. I have to trust the process of God.
They should be remembered as people always trying to help. People that impacted their community, impacted their environment with fun and love.
I just want them to be remembered by their smile and laughter. There was always jokes with us. They're both goofy.
In honor of Shakima and her brother, Shakima's fellow Fulton County deputies created Operation Take a Stand, a new categorization system that helps police prioritize victims of domestic violence.
They came up with a system of picking out warrants that are based on domestic violence issues, and they did that in honor of Shakima.
Although there were no instances of domestic violence reported in Shakima and Bo's relationship prior to the murder, her family believes all the signs were there.
Look, I ain't trying to hear all that. I ain't trying to hear all that right now.
I want young ladies to know these signs. Don't just sit there and argue. If you see that abuse, if you see that hurt, that pain, leave. It's not worth it, and it's not gonna get better. Believe me.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.
Patrick Dorismond had no way of knowing that the last ordinary conversation of his life would begin with a single question from a stranger. It was the kind of question that drifted through certain New York streets every night, so common that most people ignored it without a second thought. But on the night of March 16, 2000, near the intersection of West 48th Street and 8th Avenue, that question would become the spark that ignited one of the most controversial police shootings in modern New York history. Within less than a minute, an unarmed 26-year-old security guard would be lying on the cold sidewalk with a bullet in his chest, while sirens echoed between the towering buildings of Midtown Manhattan. Before the city could understand what had happened, the arguments had already begun. Was this a tragic act of self-defense by an undercover officer? Or was it another young black man who had become the victim of a policing strategy that saw suspicion before humanity? The answer depended on whom you asked. Police reports painted a rapidly escalating struggle between an undercover detective and an aggressive suspect. Witnesses described something entirely different, recalling confusion, anger, and a man who never even realized he was confronting police officers. Television stations interrupted their regular programming with breaking news. Newspapers rushed special editions into print before dawn. Radio hosts argued through the night while politicians prepared carefully worded statements. Almost immediately, Patrick Dorismond's name became something larger than the life he had actually lived. He became a symbol. A headline. A political battleground. Yet behind every headline stood a family whose son never came home. To understand why his death shook New York so deeply, it is necessary to step back from the courtroom debates, the political speeches, and the endless television discussions. Before Patrick Dorismond became a national story, he was simply Patrick. A son. A brother. A friend. A man trying to build a stable future through honest work. Those who loved him did not describe him as someone chasing danger. They remembered laughter that filled family gatherings, quiet conversations after church, and the dependable habit of showing up whenever someone needed help. His future was filled with ordinary plans rather than extraordinary dreams. Those ordinary plans would disappear forever in a matter of seconds. The city around him, however, was anything but ordinary. New York at the turn of the millennium was a city transformed. Only a decade earlier, many neighborhoods had struggled under high crime rates, open drug markets, and violent street gangs. By 2000, politicians proudly pointed to dramatically falling crime statistics as proof that aggressive policing had restored order. The numbers were impressive. Murders had dropped. Robberies had fallen. Tourism was booming again. Office towers filled the skyline with confidence, and Times Square had been reshaped from a place once associated with crime into a destination crowded with bright lights and visitors from around the world. But beneath that image of success, another reality existed. Many residents, particularly Black and Latino New Yorkers, experienced the city's new approach very differently. They spoke about being stopped without explanation, questioned on sidewalks, searched against walls, and treated as suspects before they were treated as citizens. Young men learned to recognize unmarked police cars almost instinctively. Parents warned their children to stay calm during encounters with officers, to keep their hands visible, and never argue even if they believed they had done nothing wrong. For many families, these conversations were as common as reminders to lock the front door before bed. At the center of this debate stood specialized police units whose mission was simple: find crime before crime found the city. Undercover operations became one of the department's preferred weapons against illegal drug sales. Officers dressed like ordinary civilians wandered neighborhoods pretending to buy narcotics. They approached strangers with carefully chosen questions designed to identify dealers. If someone agreed to sell drugs or direct them to a supplier, backup officers waiting nearby would move in for an arrest. Supporters praised the strategy as proactive policing that prevented crime before violence erupted. Critics argued that it encouraged officers to judge people based on appearance, neighborhood, race, or age. They questioned how many innocent people had been approached simply because they looked like someone officers expected to find. These competing realities were quietly moving toward each other long before Patrick Dorismond ever stepped onto West 48th Street that March evening. The weather carried the lingering chill of late winter. Spring was approaching, but New York had not yet surrendered its cold evenings. The streets of Midtown remained alive long after sunset. Yellow taxis flowed endlessly through intersections, their headlights reflecting across damp pavement. Office workers hurried toward subway entrances. Theater crowds spilled from restaurants after dinner. Steam drifted from underground vents while distant police sirens blended into the constant soundtrack of Manhattan. The city never truly slept. It simply changed shifts. Somewhere among thousands of strangers walking those sidewalks was Patrick Dorismond. Nothing about his appearance suggested that history was quietly waiting around the corner. He was not carrying a weapon. He was not transporting drugs. He was not running from anyone. He was simply another face in the evening crowd, finishing another ordinary day. The remarkable thing about tragedies is how ordinary the moments before them often appear. There is no dramatic music announcing disaster. No warning written across the sky. People laugh, check their watches, complain about work, think about tomorrow, and continue walking. Life gives no indication that it is about to divide itself forever into before and after. For Patrick's family, that night began like countless others. No one imagined they were living the final chapter of his life. His parents expected another normal evening. Relatives continued preparing for upcoming family celebrations. Conversations centered on work schedules, church activities, and everyday responsibilities. The future appeared predictable. Weddings were being planned. Careers were moving forward. The ordinary rhythm of family life continued without interruption. Across the city, undercover officers prepared for another routine operation. For them, the assignment also seemed familiar. Blend into the crowd. Approach potential suspects. Ask simple questions. Watch carefully. Wait for backup if necessary. The operation had been performed countless times before by countless officers. Most ended with an arrest or no interaction at all. Few expected violence. Fewer still expected a shooting that would dominate headlines for weeks. History often turns not because people seek extraordinary moments, but because ordinary routines collide under extraordinary circumstances. Neither Patrick Dorismond nor Anthony Vasquez woke that morning believing their names would soon be known across America. One expected another workday. The other expected another police operation. Both entered the evening believing they understood the city around them. Neither realized how quickly certainty could disappear. When investigators later reconstructed the events, they focused on seconds. Witnesses tried to remember exact words. Lawyers debated movements measured in inches. Experts analyzed whether voices became louder before hands made contact. Every fraction of the encounter would later carry enormous legal significance. Yet beneath all those technical details lay a deeper question that statistics and courtroom testimony could never fully answer. How does an ordinary encounter between strangers become fatal so quickly? That question reached beyond one shooting. It reached into the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. It reached into assumptions carried by both officers and civilians. It reached into fear, perception, race, training, and human instinct. The shooting itself lasted only moments. Its consequences would last decades. As dawn approached on March 17, detectives photographed the sidewalk where Patrick Dorismond had fallen. Reporters gathered outside police headquarters searching for confirmation. Television cameras captured grieving relatives trying to comprehend impossible news. Community leaders demanded answers before all the facts were known. Police officials defended their officers while promising a full investigation. Protest organizers began making phone calls before sunrise. Across New York, millions of residents woke to discover another name joining an already painful list of controversial police encounters. Most of them had never heard of Patrick Dorismond before that morning. By the end of the week, almost everyone would. His story would become far more than an investigation into a single gunshot fired on a Manhattan sidewalk. It would expose the invisible tension that had been building beneath New York's celebrated crime reduction. It would force uncomfortable conversations about trust, identity, and the price of aggressive policing. It would leave one family forever wondering how a hard-working young man who had left home expecting to return after another ordinary evening instead became the center of one of the city's most enduring controversies. And like so many true crime stories, everything began with a moment so small that, had a different decision been made by either man, history might never have remembered that cold March night at all. The story of Patrick Dorismond did not begin beneath the neon lights of Midtown Manhattan. It began thousands of miles away, in a country whose history had taught generations of families that survival often depended on resilience. Haiti, the first black republic in the world, had endured decades of political instability, economic hardship, and uncertainty. Like countless other parents, Patrick's family dreamed of something simple rather than extraordinary. They wanted safety. They wanted opportunity. They wanted their children to grow up believing that tomorrow could be better than today. When Patrick was still a young child, the family made the difficult decision to leave Haiti behind and start over in New York City. The move was not glamorous. It meant leaving familiar streets, relatives, traditions, and the comfort of speaking one's own language every day. They arrived carrying little more than hope and the determination that had sustained so many immigrant families before them. Brooklyn became home. It was a borough built by people who had traveled across oceans chasing a second chance. Every block carried accents from somewhere else in the world. Caribbean grocery stores stood beside Italian bakeries. Churches overflowed on Sundays with families dressed in their best clothes. Children learned to switch effortlessly between cultures, speaking one language at home and another at school, growing up with identities shaped by both the country they had left behind and the city that now surrounded them. Patrick adapted quickly. Friends later remembered a young man who smiled easily without demanding attention. He was not loud. He was not someone constantly searching for conflict or excitement. If anything, people described him as dependable. When someone needed help carrying furniture, Patrick arrived. When family gatherings needed another pair of hands setting up tables or cleaning afterward, Patrick stayed until the work was finished. Reliability is rarely considered remarkable until it disappears, but those closest to him would later realize that his quiet consistency had become one of the defining characteristics of his life. His parents worked hard to provide stability, teaching their children values that were common in many immigrant households. Respect elders. Work honestly. Stay away from trouble. Protect your family. Faith also occupied an important place in their lives. Church was not merely a weekly obligation, it was part of the family's identity. It connected them to their Haitian community while providing comfort in a city that often felt enormous and indifferent. Patrick carried those lessons into adulthood. He was not perfect. Few people are. Like many young men growing up in Brooklyn during the 1980s and 1990s, he had occasional encounters with police that never developed into serious criminal convictions. Yet there was a significant difference between living in neighborhoods where police contact was common and living the life of a criminal. Friends consistently insisted that Patrick chose work over shortcuts. He believed that earning a paycheck honestly might be slower, but it allowed him to sleep without fear. By his mid-20s, Patrick had found employment as a security guard. The job did not make him wealthy. It demanded long hours, irregular schedules, and patience. Much of the work involved standing for hours, watching entrances, greeting employees, checking identification, and remaining alert while little seemed to happen. It was the kind of occupation that often went unnoticed until something went wrong. Yet Patrick approached it seriously because it represented something larger than the paycheck itself. It represented responsibility. Co-workers described him as punctual. He rarely complained. He understood that many families depended on jobs exactly like his. Missing work unnecessarily meant risking opportunities that were difficult to replace. Every shift completed successfully brought him one step closer to the future he imagined. That future was refreshingly ordinary. Patrick was not chasing celebrity. He was not trying to become rich overnight. He wanted stability. He talked about building a better life, supporting his family, and eventually creating one of his own. Those ambitions may sound modest, but for many hardworking young adults, ordinary dreams carry extraordinary importance. They are built slowly through daily sacrifices rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Family remained at the center of everything. The Dorismond household was close-knit in the way many immigrant families become after rebuilding their lives together. Celebrations were loud, meals were shared, and relatives stayed connected even when work schedules made gathering difficult. There was always another birthday approaching, another baptism, another wedding to prepare for. Every event strengthened relationships that had survived migration, financial struggles, and the countless challenges of beginning again in a foreign country. In early 2000, the family had every reason to feel hopeful. Patrick's sister was preparing for her wedding. Conversations naturally revolved around invitations, clothing, decorations, and relatives expected to travel for the ceremony. Weddings have a remarkable way of filling households with optimism. They encourage people to think about the future rather than the past. Patrick looked forward to celebrating with everyone else. No one imagined that instead of planning a wedding, they would soon be planning a funeral. Outside the warmth of family life, New York continued evolving into a city celebrated for its falling crime statistics. Newspapers praised Mayor Rudy Giuliani's administration for restoring public order. Visitors admired Times Square without remembering how dangerous many considered it only years earlier. Investors returned. Businesses expanded. Tourism flourished. The transformation became a source of civic pride. But statistics rarely tell every story. While many New Yorkers appreciated safer streets, others quietly questioned the methods responsible for producing those numbers. Reports of aggressive police tactics circulated throughout minority neighborhoods with increasing frequency. Young black men often exchanged advice about handling police encounters the same way previous generations discussed avoiding dangerous intersections after dark. Keep your hands where officers can see them. Do not argue. Stay calm. Answer carefully. Go home safely. These unwritten rules reflected experience rather than paranoia. Police departments across the country had embraced proactive strategies intended to remove illegal guns and narcotics before crimes occurred. In New York, specialized units such as the Street Crime Unit became central to that philosophy. Officers believed waiting for crimes to happen placed innocent people at unnecessary risk. Instead, they sought suspicious behavior before violence erupted. The approach produced measurable successes. It also produced resentment. Critics argued that suspicion itself had become unevenly distributed. Certain neighborhoods received heavier police attention. Certain appearances attracted greater scrutiny. Young Black and Latino men frequently described feeling watched even while doing nothing illegal. For officers working undercover, however, hesitation carried its own dangers. They entered unpredictable situations without uniforms identifying them as police. They depended upon instinct, rapid judgment, and split-second decision-making. Every stranger represented uncertainty. Every encounter possessed the potential to become violent without warning. Officers trained themselves to anticipate danger because failing to recognize it quickly enough could prove fatal. These two perspectives rarely met peacefully. One side believed officers approached innocent citizens with unnecessary suspicion. The other believed officers confronted unpredictable threats every day. Between those competing realities existed ordinary people simply trying to live their lives. Patrick Dorismond happened to be one of them. Friends remembered that he enjoyed simple pleasures after work. Spending time with companions, sharing conversations, attending church, laughing during family gatherings, these moments mattered far more than expensive entertainment. He was known for treating people respectfully, even when disagreements arose. That did not mean he accepted insults quietly. Like many individuals with strong personal dignity, he reacted when he believed someone questioned his character. Those who knew Patrick said one accusation offended him more than almost any other: being mistaken for a drug dealer. He understood the stereotypes attached to young black men in New York. He knew appearances sometimes shaped assumptions before words were exchanged. Working honestly had become part of his identity precisely because he wanted to separate himself from those assumptions. Ironically, that sense of personal pride would later become one of the central elements discussed after his death. Investigators attempted to reconstruct his emotional state during the final moments of his life. Would he have reacted differently if approached another way? Would the conversation have ended peacefully had different words been chosen? Could either side have recognized the misunderstanding before physical contact occurred? Such questions would dominate legal proceedings and public debate for years. Yet on the afternoon of March 16, 2000, none of those questions existed. Patrick prepared for work as he had countless times before. He dressed. He left home. He expected another ordinary evening. Somewhere else in the city, undercover officers prepared for another operation with equal confidence. They reviewed assignments, coordinated with fellow officers, and anticipated another routine night enforcing narcotics laws. Neither side considered the possibility that history was quietly arranging their paths to cross. The city surrounding them moved with its usual relentless rhythm. Subway trains thundered beneath the streets. Office buildings emptied into crowded sidewalks. Restaurants filled with customers escaping the lingering cold of late winter. Yellow taxis hurried through intersections without noticing faces inside the crowd. Among those countless strangers walking beneath Manhattan's lights was a 26-year-old security guard thinking about tomorrow instead of realizing that tomorrow would never come. For Patrick Dorismond, March 16th had begun like every other workday. Nothing about the morning suggested that by midnight his name would appear in police reports. Nothing warned his family that ordinary routines were about to collapse into irreversible tragedy. Nothing hinted that a city already divided over policing would soon find itself confronting another painful question. What happens when two people enter the same encounter carrying completely different assumptions about one another, and only one of them walks away alive? March 16, 2000, arrived without ceremony. There was no storm gathering above Manhattan. No extraordinary event dominating the morning headlines. The city woke to another Thursday in late winter, wrapped in gray skies and cold air that lingered longer than most New Yorkers wished. Rush-hour commuters poured into subway stations with paper cups of coffee warming their hands. Delivery trucks blocked narrow streets before sunrise. Construction crews shouted over the rumble of machinery while steam curled upward from manholes, dissolving into the chilly morning air. For nearly 8 million people, it was simply another day. For Patrick Dorismond, it was a day that looked almost identical to hundreds that had come before it. He woke with responsibilities rather than excitement. His life was built around routines. There was comfort in knowing where he needed to be, what work awaited him, and which faces he would probably see before the day ended. Security work was rarely glamorous, but it rewarded reliability. Patrick had earned a reputation as someone who showed up when expected, stayed focused, and treated people with respect. His family remembered nothing unusual about his mood that day. There were no dramatic arguments. No emotional farewells. No lingering sense that something was wrong. If anything, the atmosphere inside the Dorismond household reflected anticipation rather than anxiety. Preparations for Patrick's sister's upcoming wedding continued to occupy conversations. Weddings have a way of filling homes with lists, deadlines, and laughter. Someone always needed to call another relative. Someone else needed to confirm arrangements. Family members debated details that seemed enormously important in the moment but would later fade into insignificance. Patrick listened. He smiled. He contributed when asked. No one imagined those conversations would become precious memories replayed endlessly after his death. As he left home, his mother likely expected what every parent hopes for from an adult child with a steady job. Go to work. Come home safely. See you tomorrow. The simplicity of those expectations would later make the loss even harder to accept. Across Brooklyn and Manhattan, thousands of police officers also began their shifts. Some reported to precinct stations. Others climbed into patrol cars. Detectives reviewed ongoing investigations. Specialized units received assignments based on crime reports, intelligence, and neighborhood activity. Among them were members of the NYPD Street Crime Unit, an elite plainclothes division created to combat violent crime and illegal firearms. Officers assigned to these teams prided themselves on aggressive enforcement. They believed criminals were less likely to recognize officers who blended into the crowd without uniforms. Anthony Vasquez prepared for another undercover assignment. Years of experience had shaped the instincts required for plainclothes policing. Officers could not rely on uniforms to establish authority. They depended upon observation, confidence, and rapid decision-making. Every encounter carried uncertainty because suspects rarely knew they were speaking to police officers until arrests began. Training emphasized awareness. Watch the hands. Watch the eyes. Watch body language. React before danger escalates. Those lessons became second nature after enough time on the streets. By late afternoon, Manhattan settled into its familiar rhythm. Tourists filled Times Square carrying shopping bags and cameras despite the cold. Broadway theaters prepared for evening performances. Office workers counted the remaining hours before leaving for home. Restaurant kitchens accelerated their pace as dinner reservations approached. Traffic crawled through Midtown beneath glowing billboards that promised luxury, entertainment, and opportunity. The city projected confidence. Few visitors realized they were standing only blocks away from neighborhoods where undercover narcotics operations quietly unfolded almost every night. Patrick finished his work later that evening. The responsibilities of his shift were behind him. Like many workers after a long day, he looked forward to relaxing. Instead of rushing immediately home, he spent time with a friend. There was nothing unusual about that decision. Friends often walked together after work, talking about ordinary subjects that rarely seemed important enough to remember later. Jobs. Sports. Family. Weekend plans. Conversations drifted naturally without anyone realizing which words would become the last. Witnesses later placed Patrick and his companion walking near West 48th Street and 8th Avenue sometime after 11 o'clock. Midtown at that hour existed in transition. The theater district still pulsed with life. Crowds emerged from Broadway shows wearing heavy coats against the cold. Taxi horns echoed through narrow streets. Restaurant employees carried trash bags toward alleyways. Street vendors packed away carts after long days of business. Business travelers hurried toward hotels while late-night workers prepared to begin their own shifts. It was busy enough for strangers to disappear into the crowd. Busy enough that one brief encounter attracted little immediate attention. Patrick and his friend eventually paused outside a building. Perhaps they were finishing a conversation. Perhaps they were deciding where to go next. Perhaps they simply stopped walking for a moment after a long day. No witness could later explain exactly why they stood there. They were simply two young men talking on a Manhattan sidewalk. Elsewhere nearby, undercover officers continued conducting a buy-and-bust operation. These operations followed a familiar pattern. Plainclothes officers approached individuals they believed might be involved in narcotics activity. The officer would pretend to be a buyer searching for marijuana or other drugs. If the target agreed to sell drugs or directed officers toward someone who could, Backup teams moved quickly to make arrests. Supporters considered the tactic efficient. Critics believed it relied too heavily on assumptions. The operation that night had already involved multiple contacts with pedestrians. Most interactions ended uneventfully. People declined. People walked away. Officers continued searching. Then Anthony Vasquez noticed Patrick Dorismond. Exactly why Patrick attracted attention has remained a subject of debate for years. Police maintained that officers were simply conducting routine undercover work. Critics questioned whether appearance and race influenced who officers chose to approach. Whatever the reasoning, Vasquez decided to initiate contact. From Patrick's perspective, a stranger was about to interrupt an ordinary conversation. From Vasquez's perspective, he was about to perform another familiar investigative technique. Neither man fully understood the other. That misunderstanding would prove catastrophic. Imagine the scene through Patrick's eyes. A long workday is finally over. You are standing with a friend in the middle of Manhattan. Traffic moves behind you. People pass without paying attention. A man you have never met walks directly toward you. He does not identify himself as a police officer. He wears ordinary clothes. There is no badge immediately visible. Nothing distinguishes him from hundreds of strangers walking nearby. Then he asks a question. Do you have any weed? The words themselves were not unusual in certain parts of New York. But their implication carried weight. To Patrick, according to friends and witnesses, the question was deeply insulting. He had spent years working honestly. He carried himself with pride. Being casually mistaken for someone selling illegal drugs struck at something personal. Several witnesses later recalled that Patrick reacted immediately. Not with fear. With offense. His response has been reported in slightly different forms over the years, but the meaning remained remarkably consistent. He challenged the assumption. He questioned why anyone would believe he sold drugs. His tone grew sharper. His posture changed. The conversation shifted almost instantly from unexpected to confrontational. At that precise moment, everything still could have ended peacefully. A stranger could have apologized. Patrick could have walked away. The encounter might have become nothing more than an unpleasant memory. Instead, both men remained where they were. Each interpreted the other's behavior through completely different assumptions. Patrick believed he was confronting an insulting civilian. Anthony Vasquez believed he was dealing with an increasingly confrontational suspect during an undercover police operation. Neither perspective included complete information. The gap between those realities narrowed with frightening speed. Nearby pedestrians continued walking. Most had no reason to notice two men exchanging tense words. Arguments occurred every day in New York. People raised voices. People cursed. People walked away. The city absorbed conflict without slowing down. No one passing that corner knew they were seconds away from witnessing an event that would dominate national news. For Patrick's friend, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. What began as casual conversation now carried visible tension. Voices became louder. Body language stiffened. Personal space disappeared. Two strangers stood face to face beneath the lights of Midtown Manhattan. One believed his dignity had been challenged. The other believed control of the situation might be slipping away. History often remembers gunshots. It rarely remembers the silence immediately before them. That silence lasted only an instant. Within moments, words would give way to movement. Movement would become physical contact. And before anyone fully understood what was happening, a single bullet would forever alter the lives of everyone standing on that sidewalk. The ordinary Thursday that had begun with routine schedules and ordinary expectations was about to become one of the most controversial nights in the history of the New York Police Department. The next 60 seconds would be examined by detectives, prosecutors, journalists, politicians, civil rights leaders, police trainers, psychologists, and grieving family members for years to come. But none of them could stop the clock. The confrontation had already begun. And there was no turning back. The distance between Patrick Dorismond and Anthony Vasquez was now measured in inches rather than feet. Around them, Midtown Manhattan continued moving as if nothing unusual was happening. Taxi drivers leaned on their horns at impatient intersections. Theatergoers laughed as they spilled onto crowded sidewalks after evening performances. Hotel doormen greeted arriving guests beneath bright marquees. Steam drifted lazily from underground vents, dissolving into the cold March air before disappearing into the darkness. The city did not stop. It never does. In a place where thousands of conversations begin and end every minute, one argument attracted little attention at first. Raised voices were part of New York's soundtrack. Most people heard them, glanced briefly, and kept walking. Patrick had no reason to believe that the man standing in front of him was an undercover police officer. That fact would later become one of the most fiercely debated elements of the entire case. Anthony Vasquez was dressed as a civilian because that was exactly what his assignment required. The success of a buy-and-bust operation depended on blending into the crowd. A visible badge or police uniform would immediately destroy the illusion. To Patrick, however, appearances mattered. He saw an unfamiliar man approach him without invitation. He heard an offensive question. He felt his character had been insulted. Nothing in those first moments suggested he was participating in a police investigation. Witnesses later offered slightly different descriptions of Patrick's expression, but they agreed on one point. He looked angry. Not frightened. Not guilty. Angry. It was the anger of someone who believed he had been unfairly judged before saying a single word. Friends who knew Patrick were not surprised by that reaction. They would later explain that Patrick took pride in earning an honest living. Working long hours as a security guard did not make him wealthy, but it allowed him to stand tall. He was not interested in easy money or illegal shortcuts. Being casually mistaken for a drug dealer cut deeply because it contradicted the life he had spent years trying to build. The exchange grew sharper. Patrick stepped closer. Anthony Vasquez remained where he stood. Their voices rose above the surrounding noise. People nearby began turning their heads. At this stage, there was still no physical violence. Only words. Words spoken quickly. Words spoken with emotion. Words that would later be repeated in police interviews, courtroom testimony, newspaper articles, and television documentaries. No recording existed. No body camera captured the encounter. The truth would ultimately depend on memories formed during a few chaotic seconds. According to the official police account, Patrick became physically aggressive first. Investigators were told that he shoved Vasquez during the confrontation. That push, officers argued, transformed a verbal disagreement into a physical struggle. Civilian witnesses described something less certain. Some believed the movement was mutual. Others recalled both men moving toward each other almost simultaneously. Several insisted the confrontation escalated too quickly for anyone to identify exactly who initiated physical contact. Human memory often struggles under stress. Especially when events unfold in seconds. Especially when no one realizes they are watching history. The sidewalk suddenly became much smaller. Patrick and Vasquez collided. Hands reached out. Bodies shifted. The argument became a struggle. Exactly what each man intended during those first moments remains impossible to know. Patrick may have believed he was defending himself against an aggressive stranger. Vasquez may have believed he was attempting to control a resistant suspect. Neither interpretation could erase one critical reality. Patrick still did not know he was fighting with a police officer. That possibility has remained central to discussions surrounding the case ever since. If he had known, would everything have ended differently? No investigation could answer that question. The struggle intensified. Witnesses described rapid movement rather than prolonged fighting. It was not a lengthy street brawl. It was sudden, chaotic, confusing. Nearby undercover officers began reacting almost immediately. Training teaches officers that hesitation during a violent confrontation can cost lives. Backup personnel started moving toward the scene. Pedestrians instinctively stepped backward. Some froze. Others continued walking, unsure whether they were witnessing a robbery, a fight between strangers, or something else entirely. Nobody expected gunfire. Not yet. Anthony Vasquez later stated that during the struggle he feared for his safety. Fear is a difficult emotion to measure after the fact. Investigators can document injuries. They can examine physical evidence. They can calculate distances. Fear exists only inside the person experiencing it. According to Vasquez, the confrontation had reached the point where he believed deadly force was necessary. Critics would later ask a different question. Necessary against what? Patrick carried no firearm. He carried no knife. There was no evidence he possessed any weapon whatsoever. But those facts were not known in the instant before the trigger was pulled. They became clear only afterward. Time seemed to compress. Seconds stretched into fragments. One movement. One decision. One irreversible action. Anthony Vasquez reached for his handgun. Whether Patrick saw the weapon before it was fired remains uncertain. Some witnesses believed everything happened too quickly. Others recalled only hearing the shot before understanding what had occurred. Then the sound shattered the night. One gunshot. Not several. Just one. For a brief instant, the noise seemed to silence everything around it. People stopped walking. Heads turned. The city's constant rhythm paused just long enough for confusion to spread through the crowd. Patrick Dorismond staggered. The bullet had entered his chest. His body reacted before his mind could fully process what had happened. Shock replaced anger. Strength disappeared almost instantly. He collapsed onto the sidewalk. Concrete met flesh with terrible finality. The struggle ended as suddenly as it had begun. There was no dramatic chase. No exchange of gunfire. No hidden weapon falling onto the pavement. Only an unarmed 26-year-old security guard lying motionless beneath the lights of Midtown Manhattan. For a moment, nobody moved. Witnesses later described the strange silence that often follows sudden violence. It was as if everyone present needed several seconds to accept what their eyes were seeing. Then reality returned all at once. People shouted. Someone screamed for help. Others stepped backward in fear. Several pedestrians reached instinctively for nearby telephones. This was before smartphones. Emergency calls came from payphones, businesses, and anyone carrying a mobile phone large enough to be considered a luxury at the time. Backup officers rushed forward. Someone identified himself as police. The words arrived too late for Patrick. Blood spread across the pavement beneath him. The cold sidewalk that moments earlier had simply been another piece of Manhattan became a crime scene. Patrick struggled to breathe. The human body fights desperately to survive even after catastrophic injury. Every breath becomes work. Every heartbeat becomes weaker. Witnesses recalled the confusion rather than clear sequences of events. Some stood frozen. Others cried. Traffic slowed as drivers realized something serious had happened. Sirens approached from somewhere in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Emergency medical personnel were dispatched almost immediately. For paramedics, the situation followed familiar procedures. Secure the scene. Reach the patient. Control bleeding. Assess breathing. Prepare rapid transport. Training leaves little room for emotion. Only afterward do many first responders allow themselves to consider the human tragedy unfolding before them. Patrick was placed onto a stretcher. Medical personnel worked quickly. Every minute mattered. The ambulance doors closed. Lights flashed against nearby buildings as the vehicle accelerated toward the hospital. Behind it remained scattered evidence. Police officers secured the area. Yellow crime scene tape appeared. Detectives were notified. Shell casings were documented. Witnesses were identified. Routine investigative procedures began almost instantly. But there was one discovery that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Patrick Dorismond had no gun. Officers searched him carefully. Nothing. No handgun. No knife. No illegal drugs. No evidence that he had been participating in narcotics trafficking. Only personal belongings carried by an ordinary young man returning home after work. That discovery spread quickly among investigators. The implications were immediate. If Patrick had been unarmed, why had deadly force become necessary? Police officials cautioned against drawing conclusions too quickly. They emphasized that officers are not required to wait until a suspect produces a weapon before defending themselves if they reasonably fear serious bodily harm. Civil rights advocates viewed the facts differently. An unarmed man was dead. The officer who shot him was alive. Questions multiplied faster than answers. At the hospital, doctors fought to save Patrick's life. Trauma teams are trained to move with extraordinary efficiency. Every second is organized. Every instruction is precise. Chest injuries demand immediate intervention. Blood loss must be controlled. Organs assessed. Circulation restored if possible. Despite every effort, the damage proved overwhelming. Patrick Dorismond died shortly afterward. He was 26 years old. While physicians formally pronounced his death, another heartbreaking task had already begun elsewhere. Someone needed to notify his family. No training manual can make that responsibility easy. A normal evening was about to become the worst night of their lives. His relatives had no reason to expect police officers at their door. Perhaps they imagined Patrick was still talking with friends. Perhaps they assumed he was on his way home. Instead, they would learn that their son, brother, and friend had been shot by an undercover New York police officer during an operation that, according to investigators, began with a simple question about marijuana. The news was almost impossible to comprehend. How could an honest security guard leave work and never return? How could a conversation lasting less than a minute end in death? How could someone with no weapon become the fatality in a narcotics investigation? As grief overwhelmed one family, another process began unfolding across New York. Police supervisors prepared official statements. Detectives organized interviews. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office was notified. Reporters started making phone calls after hearing radio dispatches about an officer-involved shooting. Before sunrise, Patrick Dorismond's death would no longer belong only to those who loved him. It would belong to an entire city searching for answers. And those answers, instead of bringing clarity, would ignite one of the fiercest public debates New York had seen in years. The sidewalk at the corner of West 48th Street and 8th Avenue no longer resembled the busy stretch of Midtown Manhattan it had been only minutes earlier. The laughter from nearby restaurants still drifted into the cold night air. Theater audiences continued leaving Broadway performances, unaware that just a short walk away, detectives were beginning the painstaking process of documenting a scene that would soon dominate national headlines. Neon lights reflected across damp pavement, mixing with the flashing red and blue lights of police vehicles that now surrounded the intersection. The city had resumed moving. Crime scenes never stop New York for long. Instead, New York flows around them. Yellow police tape stretched across portions of the sidewalk as officers redirected curious pedestrians away from the growing cluster of investigators. Some people stopped briefly, hoping to understand what had happened. Others glanced once before continuing toward subway stations or hotel entrances. Most would not learn until the following morning that they had unknowingly walked past one of the most controversial police shootings of the year. Detectives from the Manhattan South Homicide Squad arrived with cameras, evidence markers, measuring tapes, and notebooks. Every officer understood the significance of an officer-involved shooting. Unlike ordinary homicide investigations, these cases demanded extraordinary scrutiny. Every action taken by police would eventually be examined by prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, civil rights organizations, and the public. Nothing could be overlooked. The first photographs captured the position where Patrick Dorismond had collapsed. Although paramedics had already transported him to the hospital, traces of blood remained on the concrete. Investigators carefully marked the location. Measurements were recorded. Distances between witnesses, officers, and physical evidence became part of an official reconstruction that would later occupy countless hours of testimony. Nearby, another detective located the single spent shell casing. It rested quietly on the pavement, almost insignificant in appearance. A small brass cylinder. Light enough to fit inside a pocket. Ordinary enough to be overlooked by anyone not searching for it. Yet that tiny piece of metal represented the only shot fired that night. One trigger pull. One bullet. One life forever changed. Crime scene technicians photographed the casing before placing it into an evidence container. Every movement followed procedure. Every signature documented the chain of custody. There could be no mistakes. Meanwhile, another team began searching the immediate area for anything Patrick might have dropped during the struggle. Wallet. Identification. Personal belongings. Possible evidence. The search was methodical. Nothing suggested Patrick had carried illegal narcotics. Nothing suggested he possessed a firearm. Nothing suggested he had hidden a knife. Investigators searched carefully because assumptions have no place inside an official investigation. Evidence either exists or it does not. In Patrick's case, officers found no weapon. That discovery immediately complicated the narrative. If Patrick had been armed, investigators could evaluate whether he had attempted to reach for a weapon. If drugs had been recovered, prosecutors might argue the undercover operation had correctly identified criminal activity. Instead, investigators found neither. The absence of evidence quickly became as important as the evidence itself. Word spread quietly among officers securing the perimeter. Unarmed. No drugs. No knife. No gun. Each repeated observation carried increasing weight. Experienced detectives understood exactly what those facts meant. Public attention would be enormous. Across town, emergency physicians had already informed investigators that Patrick Dorismond had died from the gunshot wound. The case officially became a homicide investigation. Not criminal homicide. Not yet. Simply the legal classification applied whenever one human being causes the death of another. Determining whether that homicide had been legally justified would require weeks, perhaps months, of investigation. Anthony Vasquez was separated from other officers almost immediately. This was standard procedure. Officer-involved shootings demand careful documentation before memories become contaminated by conversations with colleagues. His firearm was collected for forensic examination. His clothing became potential evidence. Investigators documented any visible injuries he had sustained during the confrontation. Minor abrasions. Signs of physical struggle. Photographs preserved everything. When officers experience shootings, adrenaline often masks pain. Medical personnel examined Vasquez before formal questioning began. He appeared shaken. Even officers trained for violent encounters rarely emerge emotionally untouched after using deadly force. Detectives delayed extensive interviews until procedures allowed. The immediate priority remained preserving the integrity of the investigation rather than collecting rushed statements. Elsewhere, Patrick's companion faced a very different experience. Only minutes earlier, they had been walking together after work. Now he found himself surrounded by investigators asking detailed questions. Where had they been? What time had they arrived? Who spoke first? What exactly had Patrick said? Did Patrick know they were police officers? Every answer mattered. Memory, however, is rarely perfect after trauma. Witnesses often remember emotions more vividly than sequences. They remember surprise, fear, confusion. The exact order of movements becomes much harder to reconstruct. As detectives expanded the witness list, they encountered another challenge common in crowded urban investigations. People had seen different portions of the encounter. Some witnessed only the argument. Others noticed the physical struggle. Some turned toward the sound of the gunshot after it had already happened. Each perspective resembled one piece of a puzzle. No individual possessed the complete picture. Investigators worked patiently, hoping consistency would emerge from overlapping accounts. Outside police headquarters, information spread with remarkable speed. Reporters monitoring police scanners recognized the significance of an undercover officer shooting an unarmed civilian. Assignment editors redirected news crews immediately. Television vans arrived before many investigators had completed their first interviews. Camera operators adjusted equipment beneath harsh floodlights while correspondents rehearsed opening lines for late-night broadcasts. Official information remained limited. That vacuum invited speculation. Anonymous sources began speaking. Rumors multiplied. Every newsroom competed to confirm details before rival stations. Within hours, Patrick Dorisman's name appeared across television screens throughout New York. Initial reports remained cautious. An undercover police officer. A struggle. One fatal gunshot. Investigation underway. No conclusions. But the questions were already forming. Who was Patrick Dorisman? Why had officers approached him? Did he know they were police? Why had deadly force become necessary? By sunrise, newspapers rushed updated editions toward street corners across the city. Morning commuters purchased copies before boarding trains. The headlines varied in wording but shared the same central fact. Another controversial police shooting. For many readers, painful memories resurfaced immediately. Only 1 year earlier, New Yorkers had watched another nationally debated case involving police gunfire. The name Amadou Diallo still lingered in public consciousness. Comparisons began almost automatically. Community leaders recognized the potential consequences. Civil rights organizations requested immediate transparency. Police unions urged patience until investigators completed their work. Politicians carefully measured every public statement. Nobody wanted to inflame tensions. Nobody wanted to appear indifferent. Meanwhile, inside the Dorismond family home, grief overwhelmed everything else. Relatives struggled to process news that felt impossible. Patrick had left for work. He had spoken with friends. He had planned to return. Instead, police officers delivered devastating confirmation that he would never walk through the front door again. Shock often arrives before tears. Family members reportedly asked the same questions repeatedly, hoping someone might suddenly offer a different answer. Are you sure? What happened? Was there some mistake? How could this happen? No explanation could satisfy parents forced to imagine their son's final moments. They knew Patrick. They knew his character. The image presented by early reports felt incompatible with the man they loved. Friends soon gathered around the family. Church members arrived. Neighbors stopped by quietly. Some embraced grieving relatives without speaking at all. Words become remarkably inadequate after sudden loss. Presence often communicates more than language. As daylight spread across New York, Patrick's photograph began appearing on television. Viewers no longer saw an anonymous victim. They saw a young man with a gentle smile. A security guard. A son of Haitian immigrants. A brother preparing to celebrate his sister's wedding. The humanity behind the headlines became increasingly difficult to ignore. Civil rights advocates emphasized another detail repeatedly. Patrick had been unarmed. Those three words carried extraordinary emotional power. Unarmed. They appeared in newspaper headlines, television interviews, community meetings, radio discussions. Each repetition intensified public scrutiny. Police officials responded cautiously. They reminded the public that deadly force decisions depend upon perceived threats during rapidly evolving confrontations rather than discoveries made afterward. An officer, they argued, need not wait until a weapon appears if he reasonably believes his life is endangered. The legal distinction mattered enormously. So did public perception. Both sides understood that the investigation would eventually hinge upon whether Anthony Vasquez's fear had been objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Detectives continued assembling evidence. Forensic examinations confirmed ballistic findings. Medical examiners documented Patrick's injuries. Investigators revisited the scene during daylight, hoping improved visibility might reveal overlooked details. They searched nearby businesses for possible surveillance footage. In 2000, security cameras existed far less frequently than they do today. Most businesses maintained systems designed primarily to protect property rather than capture detailed images of public sidewalks. No comprehensive video recording emerged to answer the countless disputed questions. The investigation would therefore depend largely upon testimony. Human memory. Human perception. Human interpretation. Those elements rarely align perfectly. The absence of definitive video evidence created space for competing narratives. Supporters of the police emphasized the physical struggle. Supporters of Patrick emphasized the absence of weapons. Both relied upon facts. Both interpreted those facts differently. As investigators prepared reports for prosecutors, they understood that this case extended beyond one fatal encounter. Every decision would be scrutinized nationally. Every inconsistency magnified. Every unanswered question debated publicly. Somewhere beneath those legal and political realities remained a grieving family that wanted something much simpler. They wanted to understand how an ordinary evening had ended with Patrick lying on a Manhattan sidewalk. And they wanted to know whether the system responsible for investigating his death would truly search for the truth, or merely protect its own. By the end of the first 48 hours, the investigation had grown far beyond a single crime scene. What had begun as a fatal encounter on a midtown sidewalk was now unfolding simultaneously inside police headquarters, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, television newsrooms, church halls, and family living rooms across New York City. Every new piece of information seemed to answer one question while creating three more. For investigators, the challenge was clear. They were not trying to solve the mystery of who had fired the fatal shot. That fact had never been disputed. Officer Anthony Vasquez had acknowledged pulling the trigger almost immediately. The real question was infinitely more complicated. Had the shooting been legally justified? That single question would determine everything that followed. Detectives assigned to reconstruct the encounter returned repeatedly to West 48th Street and 8th Avenue. They measured distances again. They compared witness statements against the physical evidence. They reviewed radio transmissions. Every second between the first conversation and the gunshot had to be reconstructed as accurately as possible. Unlike television dramas, real investigations rarely move in straight lines. Instead, they advance through contradictions. One witness remembers a detail another never noticed. One statement supports the timeline while another challenges it. The investigator's job was not to choose the most convenient version. Their responsibility was to understand why different people could experience the same event so differently. Anthony Vasquez remained at the center of that process. Following department procedure, he provided investigators with his account of the incident. According to his statement, the undercover operation had begun exactly as intended. He had approached Patrick Dorismond while posing as someone looking to purchase marijuana. The initial question was part of the operation. Nothing unusual. Nothing personal. Then, according to Vasquez, Patrick reacted with immediate hostility. The officer stated that the verbal exchange quickly escalated. Patrick became confrontational. Physical contact followed. During the struggle, Vasquez later explained, he believed the situation had become dangerous enough to justify deadly force. His account centered on perception, not certainty. He never claimed Patrick had displayed a weapon. Instead, he maintained that the intensity of the confrontation caused him to fear serious bodily harm. Under American law, that distinction carried enormous legal significance. An officer does not necessarily need to see a firearm before using deadly force. The legal standard generally focuses on whether the officer reasonably believed there was an imminent threat of death or serious physical injury. The key word was reasonable. Everything depended on it. Civilian witnesses complicated that narrative almost immediately. Investigators interviewed numerous people who had been near the intersection that evening. Many had no connection to Patrick. They did not know Anthony Vasquez. They simply happened to be nearby when the confrontation unfolded. Several agreed that Patrick appeared offended by the question about marijuana. That much seemed relatively consistent. But what happened afterward became far less clear. Some witnesses described Patrick as angry but not violently aggressive. Others recalled seeing both men moving toward each other almost simultaneously. One remembered the confrontation happening so quickly that identifying who initiated physical contact became nearly impossible. Another insisted Patrick appeared confused rather than threatening. Each statement added another layer of uncertainty. None completely erased the others. Memory is fragile, especially under stress. Psychologists have long understood that two honest witnesses can sincerely describe the same event in dramatically different ways. People focus on different details. Some remember faces. Others remember voices. Some remember movements. Others remember emotions. Trauma reshapes perception in ways that investigators must carefully consider. There was another critical issue investigators could not ignore. Did Patrick know he was confronting police officers? The available evidence strongly suggested he did not. Anthony Vasquez had approached him while dressed as a civilian. The operation depended upon anonymity. From Patrick's perspective, the man asking about marijuana appeared to be an ordinary stranger. Friends later argued that this single fact explained Patrick's reaction. If someone insults your character without identifying themselves as law enforcement, anger becomes understandable. Police officials viewed the matter differently. Whether Patrick knew Vasquez was an officer, they argued, did not automatically determine whether deadly force became necessary once the physical struggle began. Again, the investigation returned to perception. What did Patrick believe? What did Vasquez believe? Those two realities might never completely overlap. Meanwhile, forensic investigators completed examinations of the physical evidence. Ballistics confirmed that the fatal bullet had been fired from Vasquez's service weapon. There were no additional shots. Medical examiners documented Patrick's injuries carefully. The findings established the trajectory of the bullet and confirmed the fatal wound. Equally important was what investigators did not find. No firearm. No knife. No narcotics. No evidence suggesting Patrick had been involved in drug distribution that evening. That absence became impossible to ignore. Civil rights organizations seized upon it immediately. Community leaders asked increasingly direct questions. If Patrick carried no weapon, if he possessed no drugs, why had he become the target of an undercover narcotics operation in the first place? Police officials declined to speculate publicly while the investigation remained active. Instead, they emphasized that undercover officers routinely approached individuals during buy-and-bust operations. The approach itself, they argued, did not imply guilt. It was an investigative technique. Critics remained unconvinced. Many believed the operation reflected a broader pattern in which young black men were disproportionately viewed as potential suspects. Patrick's death quickly became more than an individual tragedy. It became part of a larger conversation already unfolding across America. Inside the Dorismond family home, those political debates felt painfully distant. For them, every morning began with the same devastating reality. Patrick was gone. His bedroom remained unchanged. His belongings waited exactly where he had left them. Work uniforms would never again be worn. Shoes remained by the door. Ordinary objects suddenly became priceless reminders of a life interrupted. Relatives described the emotional shock as overwhelming. The family rejected suggestions that Patrick had behaved like a violent criminal. They knew his temperament. Yes, he possessed pride. Yes, he disliked disrespect. But they could not reconcile that personality with the image emerging from portions of the police narrative. Friends echoed those feelings. They spoke with reporters. They attended community gatherings. Again and again, they repeated similar descriptions. Patrick worked hard. Patrick went to church. Patrick respected his family. Patrick deserved to come home alive. As public attention intensified, another challenge emerged for investigators. The media. 24-hour news coverage was expanding rapidly at the beginning of the new millennium. Every development generated fresh headlines. Legal experts appeared on television analyzing use of force standards. Former police officers defended undercover tactics. Civil rights attorneys questioned the operation's foundation. Radio stations opened telephone lines to listeners. Thousands of New Yorkers called to express grief, frustration, anger, or support for law enforcement. The city seemed divided into competing interpretations of the same tragedy. Police unions urged patience. They reminded the public that officers often face impossible decisions in dangerous circumstances. Split seconds. Limited information. high stress. Judging those decisions from the safety of hindsight, they argued, ignored the realities of street policing. Community activists countered with a different perspective. Patrick had only seconds as well. He had only moments to understand why a stranger suddenly approached him. If he never realized the stranger was an officer, how could his reactions be interpreted the same way they would be if confronting uniformed police? Neither side persuaded the other. Investigators continued working quietly beneath the growing political storm. Every witness interview was documented. Every inconsistency examined. Every timeline adjusted as new information emerged. Yet one obstacle remained impossible to overcome. There was no definitive video. Today, many officer-involved shootings are captured by body cameras, surveillance systems, dashboard cameras, or mobile phones. In March 2000, that technological reality did not exist. The investigation depended almost entirely upon people. Human recollection. Human honesty. Human fallibility. Without visual proof, certainty became elusive. As days passed, prosecutors prepared the evidence for presentation to a grand jury. That process would determine whether criminal charges against Anthony Vasquez were appropriate. Grand jurors would examine witness testimony, forensic evidence, medical findings, legal standards governing police use of force. Unlike public debates, grand jury proceedings occur largely behind closed doors. Evidence is presented carefully. Witnesses testify under oath. Legal instructions define the standards that must be applied. Outside those closed rooms, however, emotions continued rising. Protests began attracting larger crowds. Church leaders organized prayer vigils. Civil rights advocates demanded transparency. Police supporters warned against condemning an officer before legal review concluded. Patrick Dorismond's name appeared on handmade signs carried through Brooklyn and Manhattan. His photograph became familiar across television screens. For some, he represented a hard-working immigrant whose life ended because of a flawed policing strategy. For others, he represented a tragic encounter in which an undercover officer believed his own life was at risk. The investigation had reached a crossroads. Facts alone no longer shaped public opinion. Experience shaped it. History shaped it. Trust, or the absence of trust, shaped it. As prosecutors prepared to place the evidence before a grand jury, one unavoidable reality remained. Everyone agreed on how the confrontation ended. Almost no one agreed on why. And somewhere between those competing versions of the truth lay the answer that Patrick's family had been seeking since the moment police officers knocked on their door in the middle of the night. Weeks passed, but for Patrick Dorismond's family, time no longer followed its ordinary rhythm. Days were no longer measured by work schedules or family dinners. They were measured by court dates, press conferences, meetings with attorneys, phone calls from reporters. Every morning began with the same painful realization that Patrick would never again walk through the front door carrying the quiet smile that so many people remembered. Outside the family's home, however, New York refused to move on. The city had experienced controversial police shootings before, yet Patrick's death seemed to strike a particularly sensitive nerve. Perhaps it was because he had been unarmed. Perhaps it was because he had been an immigrant who spent his adult life working honestly. Perhaps it was because the encounter had begun with nothing more than a question from a stranger. Whatever the reason, public attention only continued to grow. Television programs replayed diagrams of the shooting almost nightly. Newspapers published competing timelines. Editorial writers debated the larger meaning of aggressive policing. Radio hosts invited former detectives, civil rights lawyers, psychologists, clergy members, and neighborhood activists to discuss not only Patrick's death but the relationship between the New York Police Department and the communities it served. What had started as a homicide investigation was becoming something much larger. It had become a referendum on trust. At the center of that growing storm stood the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Prosecutors faced a difficult responsibility. Public opinion, however passionate, could not determine whether criminal charges would be filed. The law required evidence. The evidence had to satisfy legal standards rather than emotional ones. Every witness statement was reviewed repeatedly. Investigators compared testimony line by line. They looked for contradictions. They searched for consistency. They examined every available photograph. Forensic reports were scrutinized. Medical findings were analyzed once more. Even seemingly insignificant details received renewed attention. How far apart were Patrick and Anthony Vasquez when the struggle began? Which direction were they facing? How quickly did the confrontation become physical? Did anyone hear the officers identify themselves? Could Patrick reasonably have known they were police? These questions mattered because criminal law often depends upon perception rather than certainty. The grand jury process now became the next critical stage. Unlike a public trial, grand jury proceedings occur almost entirely behind closed doors. There are no television cameras. No spectators filling courtroom benches. No dramatic speeches designed for public audiences. Instead, prosecutors present evidence while grand jurors quietly evaluate whether probable cause exists to pursue criminal charges. For Patrick's family, waiting became almost unbearable. They understood that the grand jury represented their first opportunity to see whether the justice system viewed Patrick's death the same way they did. They believed he had been an innocent man whose life ended unnecessarily. They hoped the legal process would recognize that. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse. Some carried Patrick's photograph. Others held candles during evening vigils. Church leaders prayed with grieving relatives before scheduled hearings. Community activists spoke through loudspeakers, urging the justice system to treat Patrick's case with the same seriousness that would apply if an ordinary civilian had fired the fatal shot. The atmosphere remained tense but largely peaceful. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted reassurance that the investigation was more than a formality. Inside the grand jury room, prosecutors presented the evidence collected over weeks of investigation. Witnesses described the encounter. Forensic specialists explained the physical evidence. Medical experts discussed Patrick's injuries. Investigators reconstructed the timeline leading to the fatal gunshot. Anthony Vasquez's account also formed a central part of the presentation. His explanation remained consistent. He believed the struggle had escalated to the point where he feared serious bodily harm. The decision to fire, according to his statement, occurred during an intensely stressful confrontation unfolding within seconds. That claim immediately confronted one unavoidable fact. Patrick had been unarmed. No firearm. No knife. No drugs. The absence of weapons complicated the legal analysis but did not automatically determine its outcome. American self-defense law, particularly regarding police officers, focuses heavily upon what an officer reasonably believes during the encounter itself. Investigators therefore examined not only what Patrick possessed but what Vasquez could reasonably have perceived while struggling with him. The distinction frustrated many observers. Civil rights organizations argued that an unarmed man should not have died during a narcotics investigation that produced neither drugs nor arrests. Police organizations responded that officers cannot pause dangerous physical confrontations long enough to confirm whether someone is armed before acting. The law occupied the uncomfortable space between those competing realities. Outside the courthouse, journalists waited for every development. Television crews broadcast live throughout the day. Speculation flourished because grand jury proceedings remained confidential. Anonymous sources occasionally hinted at possible outcomes. None could be independently confirmed. Patrick's family avoided much of the media attention whenever possible. Grief had become exhausting. Every interview required reliving the worst night of their lives. Yet they also understood the importance of speaking publicly. If they remained silent, they feared Patrick would become little more than another statistic. Instead, they described him as they had always known him. A hard-working son. A loyal brother. A man excited about his sister's upcoming wedding. Someone who deserved the chance to grow older. As legal proceedings continued, another controversy unexpectedly erupted. Mayor Rudy Giuliani entered the public conversation in a way that few anticipated. During press discussions surrounding the case, portions of Patrick Dorismond's previous interactions with law enforcement became public. These were not serious criminal convictions. Nor did they establish Patrick as a drug dealer. Nevertheless, the release of those records immediately changed the public debate. Supporters of the mayor argued that providing additional background helped create a fuller understanding of the individual involved. Critics reacted with outrage. Civil rights leaders accused city officials of attempting to shift attention away from the shooting itself by attacking the victim's character. Patrick's family experienced this development as another painful blow. First, they had buried their son. Now, they believed, his reputation was being placed on trial as well. Friends spoke passionately in his defense. They reminded reporters that previous police contacts did not justify fatal force. Even if Patrick had made mistakes earlier in life, they argued, those mistakes had nothing to do with the encounter that ended his life. The public conversation became increasingly polarized. One side emphasized officer safety. The other emphasized human dignity. One side discussed split-second decisions. The other discussed racial profiling. One side argued that dangerous confrontations cannot be judged comfortably from hindsight. The other insisted that aggressive policing had created conditions where innocent people increasingly became suspects simply because of how they looked. Meanwhile, investigators completed the last remaining elements of their work. Every report had been submitted. Every witness interviewed. Every forensic examination finished. The evidence now rested almost entirely in the hands of the legal system. Then the decision finally arrived. The grand jury declined to bring criminal charges against Anthony Vasquez. Legally, the investigation had reached its most significant conclusion. Prosecutors would not pursue homicide charges. The grand jury determined that the available evidence did not establish criminal liability under the applicable legal standards governing police use of deadly force. For Patrick's family, the announcement felt devastating. They had entered the legal process hoping for accountability. Instead, they left believing the system had failed them. Outside the courthouse, emotions erupted almost immediately. Some people cried openly. Others shouted in frustration. Community leaders appealed for peaceful demonstrations while expressing profound disappointment with the outcome. Police unions welcomed the decision. They argued that the grand jury had carefully examined the evidence rather than responding to public pressure. Supporters of Anthony Vasquez insisted that no officer should face criminal punishment for making what he believed was a life-saving decision during a violent struggle. The city seemed more divided than ever. For many New Yorkers, the grand jury's decision resolved the legal question. For others, it answered nothing at all. Legal justification and moral justification are not always identical. That distinction became painfully clear in the days following the announcement. Patrick Dorismond's death had survived the criminal justice process without producing an indictment. Yet the public debate surrounding his shooting had only intensified. Questions that a courtroom could not fully answer continued echoing across New York. Should undercover narcotics operations begin with deceptive encounters involving strangers? Should officers receive different training when approaching unarmed civilians? How should race influence discussions about policing, even when no one explicitly mentions it? Can communities trust investigations conducted after police officers used deadly force? These questions extended far beyond Patrick's case. His name had become permanently connected to a national conversation that would continue for decades. The legal chapter had reached its conclusion. The emotional chapter had not. Because while the grand jury had decided there would be no criminal trial, another battle was only beginning, a battle fought not inside criminal courtrooms, but in civil litigation, public memory, and the ongoing struggle over how history would remember the life and death of Patrick Dorismond. The grand jury's decision ended the possibility of criminal prosecution. It did not end the pain. It did not quiet the questions that echoed through church sanctuaries, family kitchens, neighborhood meetings, and crowded subway platforms across New York City. If anything, the announcement created a deeper wound. For Patrick Dorismond's family, justice had never been measured only by legal definitions. They understood that the law required prosecutors to meet an extraordinarily high burden before criminal charges could move forward. Their attorneys had explained the standards. They knew what reasonable doubt meant. They knew the legal protections surrounding police officers forced to make split-second decisions. None of that changed the empty chair at family dinners. None of it explained why Patrick never came home. The days following the grand jury's decision became some of the most emotionally exhausting the family had experienced. Reporters waited outside church services. Television cameras followed relatives leaving meetings with attorneys. Friends shielded Patrick's parents from photographers whenever possible, hoping to preserve at least a small measure of privacy. But privacy becomes difficult when grief becomes national news. The Dorismond family soon realized that another legal path remained available. If criminal accountability was no longer possible, civil litigation offered a different form of justice. Unlike criminal court, where prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, civil court asks a different question. Did someone act in a way that caused unlawful harm? The burden of proof is lower. The objective is different. The outcome, if successful, is financial compensation rather than imprisonment. No amount of money could replace Patrick. His parents never claimed otherwise. Yet filing a civil lawsuit represented something larger than compensation. It represented a refusal to allow the case simply to disappear. Attorneys began preparing the lawsuit against the city of New York. The legal arguments extended beyond the single gunshot fired by Anthony Vasquez. Lawyers examined the policies governing undercover narcotics operations. Training procedures. Supervision. The decision-making process behind buy-and-bust tactics. Every document requested during discovery had the potential to reveal how the operation had been planned and whether systemic failures contributed to Patrick's death. City attorneys prepared their own defense. They argued that Anthony Vasquez had acted within the scope of his official duties and under circumstances he reasonably believed threatened his safety. The city's legal position remained consistent with the conclusions already reached during the criminal investigation. No unlawful conduct had occurred. The shooting, though tragic, was legally justified. Civil litigation unfolded much more slowly than public attention. Months became years. Depositions were conducted behind closed doors. Witnesses answered hours of questioning under oath. Experts reviewed police training manuals. Attorneys reconstructed the encounter repeatedly, searching for inconsistencies that might strengthen their respective cases. For Patrick's family, every deposition reopened emotional wounds. Each question forced them to revisit details they desperately wished had never existed. Some nights they spoke about Patrick for hours. Other nights they avoided his name entirely because saying it aloud hurt too much. Grief is unpredictable. It does not move neatly through stages. Some mornings bring acceptance. Others return the family to the shock of the very first day. Outside the courtroom, Patrick's story refused to fade. Civil rights organizations continued mentioning his name alongside other controversial police shootings. Community meetings frequently referenced the case while discussing broader concerns about policing in minority neighborhoods. Parents continued teaching their children the same difficult lessons. If the police stop you, stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Do not argue. Come home alive. Those conversations carried new urgency after Patrick's death. Many families believed survival depended not only upon obeying the law but upon surviving misunderstandings. Police organizations found themselves defending officers against growing public criticism. Many active officers privately acknowledged the emotional burden created by highly publicized shootings. Most had never fired their weapons during their careers. Those who had often carried psychological scars invisible to the public. Some officers worried that fear of criticism might eventually cause hesitation during genuinely life-threatening situations. Others quietly admitted that rebuilding trust between police and communities had become increasingly difficult. The divide seemed to widen with every controversial case. Meanwhile, Anthony Vasquez largely disappeared from public view. Beyond official legal proceedings, relatively little became publicly known about his private life following the shooting. Like many officers involved in fatal encounters, he remained a figure onto whom opposing sides projected dramatically different images. To supporters, he was an experienced undercover officer forced into an impossible decision during a violent confrontation. To critics, he represented a policing system that escalated ordinary encounters into deadly ones. The man himself remained largely silent. Patrick's family, by contrast, could never truly step away. Every anniversary brought renewed media attention. Every newspaper retrospective reopened painful memories. His photograph continued appearing whenever national conversations turned toward police accountability. For his parents, the world remembered the shooting. They remembered the child. They remembered birthday parties, church services, family vacations, laughter around dinner tables, the sound of Patrick's voice. History often reduces victims to the circumstances of their deaths. Families spend years trying to remind the world that life existed long before tragedy. As the civil lawsuit progressed, both sides evaluated the uncertainty of taking the case to trial. Trials are unpredictable. Jurors respond differently to evidence. Witness credibility varies. Legal costs continue growing. Eventually, negotiations began. Settlement discussions rarely generate dramatic headlines. They occur quietly inside conference rooms where attorneys calculate legal risks while families weigh emotional consequences. Accepting a settlement never means forgetting. Rejecting one never guarantees victory. Each decision carries its own burden. After years of litigation, New York City agreed to resolve the civil lawsuit through a financial settlement. The city agreed to pay approximately $2.25 million to Patrick Dorisman's family. The agreement specifically did not include an admission of legal wrongdoing. That distinction mattered enormously. For the city, the settlement represented the resolution of expensive litigation without conceding liability. For Patrick's family, the money could never represent justice in its purest sense. No settlement restores a son's future. No financial agreement allows parents another conversation. No check erases the memory of identifying a loved one after a fatal shooting. Yet the settlement acknowledged something important. The case deserved resolution. It deserved recognition. It deserved more than silence. Public reaction to the settlement reflected the same divisions that had characterized the case from the beginning. Some interpreted the payment as evidence that the city wished to avoid the uncertainty of trial. Others argued that municipalities frequently settle complex civil cases for practical financial reasons regardless of legal fault. Again, identical facts produced entirely different conclusions. Patrick Dorismond's death had become one of those cases through which people often viewed broader beliefs about policing rather than only the specific evidence. As years passed, new tragedies emerged across America. Different cities. Different victims. Different officers. Yet familiar questions returned again and again. How much force is reasonable? When does fear justify deadly action? How should officers approach people who have done nothing more than attract suspicion? Patrick's name continued appearing alongside those of Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Eric Garner, and many others. Each case possessed unique facts. Each also reflected recurring tensions between law enforcement responsibilities and community trust. For historians studying policing in New York, Patrick's death eventually came to symbolize a turning point. Not because it immediately changed department policy. In truth, no sweeping reforms followed overnight. The street crime unit itself would continue operating until later controversies prompted broader institutional changes. Instead, Patrick's case contributed to a growing body of public memory. Every controversial encounter added another layer. Every family told another story. Every protest expanded a conversation that refused to disappear. His death became part of a much larger national narrative about race, policing, accountability, and the fragile relationship between those sworn to protect communities and the communities themselves. Years after the shooting, people continued debating what happened during those final seconds on West 48th Street. Some remained convinced Anthony Vasquez had acted lawfully under terrifying circumstances. Others believed Patrick Dorismond had been denied the chance to explain who he really was before assumptions turned fatal. Perhaps that unresolved tension explains why the case still resonates. Not because every question has been answered, but because so many remain unanswered. Somewhere beyond legal opinions, political arguments, and courtroom transcripts lies a quieter truth. A 26-year-old security guard left work expecting to return home. His family expected to see him the next morning. Instead, they spent the following decades carrying memories that no legal proceeding could ever fully resolve. And long after the settlement papers were signed and the headlines faded from front pages, Patrick Dorismond's name continued reminding New York that sometimes the most enduring consequences of a single gunshot cannot be measured by verdicts or dollars, but by the lives forever divided into everything that came before that cold March night. And everything that came after. Nearly a quarter of a century has passed since Patrick Dorismond's death, yet the questions raised by that cold March night have never truly disappeared. Cities change. Mayors come and go. Police commissioners retire. Laws evolve. Technology transforms the way investigations are conducted. But certain cases refuse to remain in the past because they become part of something much larger than the individuals involved. Patrick's story became one of those cases. To understand its lasting impact, it is necessary to step away from the courtroom and examine what happened afterward, not only to one family, but to an entire city struggling to define the relationship between authority and trust. In the months following the civil settlement, life slowly returned to normal for most New Yorkers. Broadway continued attracting millions of visitors. Office workers hurried through Midtown exactly as they had before. The corner of West 48th Street and 8th Avenue blended back into the endless movement of Manhattan. People walked across the same sidewalk every day without realizing what had once happened there. That is one of the quiet realities of tragedy. The places where history changes often appear completely ordinary afterward. Buildings remain standing. Traffic lights continue cycling from red to green. Restaurants open for business. Only those who remember can still see the invisible scars. For Patrick's parents, there was no returning to normal. Grief does not end because legal proceedings conclude. In many ways, the end of court cases marks the beginning of a different kind of struggle. During investigations and lawsuits, families have a purpose. There are meetings to attend, documents to review, lawyers to consult, questions waiting for answers. When those processes end, silence often becomes even more painful. Patrick's bedroom could no longer remain untouched forever. At some point, someone had to decide what to do with his clothes, his photographs, his personal belongings. The small objects that once seemed ordinary suddenly became priceless. A favorite jacket still hanging in the closet. A pair of work boots by the door. Birthday cards tucked into drawers. Every item carried a memory. Every decision about those belongings felt like losing him all over again. His sister eventually celebrated her wedding. It should have been one of the happiest days in the family's history. Instead, happiness existed beside absence. There was an empty place where Patrick should have stood. An empty space in family photographs. An empty chair during the reception. The wedding continued because life always continues. But every smile carried a quiet shadow. Friends later reflected that celebrations became different after Patrick's death. No birthday passed without someone mentioning him. No Christmas arrived without remembering the gifts he once exchanged with relatives. No family gathering felt completely whole. His absence became another permanent member of the family. The Haitian community in New York also carried the memory. Patrick had not simply been an individual victim. For many Haitian immigrants, his death represented the vulnerability they felt while trying to build honest lives in a country they hoped would offer opportunity. Church leaders frequently spoke about Patrick during community events. His story became part of conversations about dignity, justice, and the responsibilities shared by both citizens and public institutions. Many young Haitian Americans who barely remembered the year 2000 eventually learned his name from parents rather than history books. Outside those communities, Patrick's case gradually entered academic research. Universities studying criminal justice began referencing the shooting when examining undercover policing strategies. Law students analyzed the grand jury's decision. Sociologists explored public reactions. Psychologists discussed perception under stress. Police academies examined officer decision-making during rapidly evolving confrontations. The case became more than history. It became material for education. Yet education did not necessarily produce agreement. Different instructors reached different conclusions. Some emphasized the extraordinary difficulty officers face when making life or death decisions in seconds. Others highlighted implicit bias, communication failures, and the dangers of undercover operations where civilians cannot immediately recognize police authority. Patrick's death remained a lesson precisely because it resisted simple explanations. The early years of the 21st century brought additional controversial police encounters across the United States. Each new case seemed to revive memories of older ones. When Sean Bell was killed in Queens in 2006, many New Yorkers immediately remembered Patrick Dorismond. Again, an unarmed black man. Again, enormous public debate. Again, questions surrounding police judgment. Later came Eric Garner. Then countless other names from cities across America. Each tragedy possessed its own facts. Each deserved to be understood individually. Yet together they formed a growing pattern in public consciousness. Patrick's story was no longer viewed in isolation. It had become one chapter within a much larger national narrative. The New York Police Department itself continued changing. Policies evolved. Training programs expanded. Technology transformed investigations. Body-worn cameras, once unimaginable during Patrick's lifetime, eventually became standard equipment for thousands of officers. Today, Many encounters that once depended entirely upon conflicting witness testimony are documented from multiple perspectives. No technology can eliminate every controversy. Cameras do not capture thoughts. They do not reveal fear. They cannot explain intentions. But they preserve moments that human memory inevitably reshapes over time. Many observers have quietly wondered how Patrick's case might have unfolded had body cameras existed in 2000. Would the video have clarified exactly how the struggle began? Would it have confirmed or challenged witness testimony? Would it have ended decades of debate? No one can know. History cannot be rewritten. It can only be examined. Anthony Vasquez's role in public memory also changed with time. For some Americans, he remained the officer whose actions symbolized aggressive policing at its worst. For others, he remained an undercover detective confronted with an unpredictable physical struggle that demanded an immediate decision. Those competing interpretations never disappeared. Neither side completely persuaded the other. That enduring disagreement reflects one of the central difficulties surrounding police use of force cases. Legal conclusions rarely erase emotional convictions. People often evaluate evidence through experiences they already carry. Someone who has always trusted law enforcement may interpret uncertainty one way. Someone whose community has experienced repeated negative encounters may interpret identical facts differently. Patrick Dorismond's case became a mirror. People often saw their own beliefs reflected within it. Years later, journalists occasionally returned to interview those who remembered Patrick personally. The stories shared by family and friends rarely focused on the shooting itself. Instead, they described ordinary moments. Patrick helping relatives move furniture. Patrick laughing during family dinners. Patrick arriving early for church. Patrick refusing shortcuts even when money was tight. These memories served an important purpose. They restored complexity. True crime stories often risk reducing human beings to the final minutes of their lives. Families resist that reduction because they understand something the public sometimes forgets. Patrick lived for 26 years. He died in less than a minute. His life deserves more attention than the 60 seconds that ended it. Perhaps that is the greatest challenge for anyone attempting to understand this case honestly. It is tempting to search for villains and heroes. Reality rarely offers such simplicity. Anthony Vasquez made a decision that permanently altered multiple lives. Patrick Dorismond lost his life. One family buried a son. Another officer lived with the consequences of a shooting that would forever define his career. Communities questioned institutions they were expected to trust. Police officers worried that public confidence continued eroding. No one emerged unchanged. Looking back today, Patrick Dorismond's death remains historically significant not because it produced immediate legal reforms or dramatic policy changes. Its importance lies elsewhere. It forced difficult conversations. It challenged comfortable assumptions. It reminded Americans that statistics celebrating lower crime rates cannot fully measure the human cost of aggressive enforcement strategies. Behind every policy stand individual lives. Behind every strategy stand unpredictable human encounters. And behind every headline stands a family forever remembering someone the world knew only briefly. Patrick never sought public attention. He never imagined documentaries would discuss his life decades later. He never expected scholars would analyze the circumstances of his death. He simply expected to finish work, spend time with a friend, and return home. That expectation was painfully ordinary. Perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Because nearly everyone understands the simple hope of ending an ordinary day exactly where it began. At home. Safe. Alive. Patrick Dorismond never received that chance. The city continued without him. History remembered him. His family loved him. And the questions raised by the final moments of his life continue challenging each new generation to ask not only how justice should be defined, but how tragedy might one day be prevented before another ordinary evening becomes another name that history refuses to forget.